So today's webinar is the third of four webinars that we're running on the topic of community-led housing. Our goal with the webinar series is to raise awareness of community-led housing in Ireland, learn from and explore international examples in operation in Europe, and reflect on its future in Ireland. In each of our webinars, we have an international speaker as well as speakers from Ireland to reflect on their experiences of community-led housing. And we found so far that these sessions are proving very popular. There's a lot of interest, and we have more than 300 people signed up for today's webinar. The first webinar in the series set the scene, and we got a really good overview from Sarah Birch on what community-led housing is and what it covers. And we also heard from Tom O'Donnell from Self-Organised Architecture about what is happening on the ground in Ireland. Our second webinar looked at the topic of community-led housing and affordable housing. And here we heard from Edouard Cabré-Roman about the work happening in Barcelona and wider afield in Catalonia, and to provide affordable housing through this form of housing. And we heard from Elva Cunningham and Eve Olney from the Community Land Trust about the project that they are working with Cork City Council on. Both of the webinars have been recorded and are available to watch on the Housing Agency's YouTube channel. Today, the topic is community-led housing for age-friendly living, and we'll shortly hear from two speakers, Maria Brenton and Anne Connolly. The Housing Options for Our Ageing Population, published in 2019, provided a policy framework in Ireland to support our older population to have increased accommodation, to look at increased accommodation options, and to give meaningful choice in how and where people choose to live as they age. So today we'll hear about a co-housing community of older women in North London who were able to choose a different accommodation to suit them, as they aged. And we'll also hear about a new co-housing community group in Ireland that's starting out on this journey. But for those of you who may have to leave the webinar before the end, I just want to flag now that on the 26th of March, we'll have the final in this series of webinars. This webinar is going to be slightly longer. It'll run for an hour and a half, as we want to allow more time at the end, after we learn from Elke Seip from Hamburg about what is happening there and how the city-state is supporting cooperative housing. But we then have a larger panel of speakers who are going to kind of explore the ideas that have been raised during these series of webinars and kind of consider how we can move forward and progress community-led housing in Ireland. So today I'm delighted to welcome the two panellists, Maria Brenton and Anne Connolly. Maria Brenton will speak first. Maria is the co-founder of New Ground Co-Housing and the UK Co-Housing Network, Senior Co-Housing Ambassador. Maria has for many years campaigned in the UK for recognition of the value of the senior co-housing model for an increasingly ageing society. She's one of the founders of the New Ground co-housing community in High Barnet, North London, and is still very closely in touch with its members. She lives in hope that it will not remain the only co-housing community in the UK dedicated to older women. Following Maria, we'll hear from Anne Connolly, the co-founder of Co-Housing Communities Ireland, which is a co-housing community for established very recently, and many of you may have read or heard about them in the last week or so in the media. At the end, there's going to be time for a Q&A, question and answer. So please, could you submit any questions you have as we go along and place them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. So I'm going to hand over now to Maria. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm really pleased to join in on this webinar, as I've been involved with various things in Dublin over the past couple of years. The key messages that we all probably do know about older people are that they're a growing part of any Western population, and that single living, isolation, loneliness, and self-neglect is widespread and leads to poor health. In the UK, a major source of National Health Service bed blocking are older people who are unable to be discharged home safely. and they're also a strain on their families and on what are still rather poor support services. And this is likely in the UK to get worse because the 50s generation coming up to old age have had fewer children and they won't have as much family support as people in my generation might have had. So, from a public policy point of view, the aging of the population is a growing expense to the public purse and a significant social problem. And to my mind, no imaginative remedies are exercising political thought as yet in the UK. Even though there's been a Older People's Housing Task Force report in late 2024, it was very generalised, and certainly not much imperative to older people themselves to start developing their own remedies. Now, New Ground, which is in High Barnet, as Rosalind said, was established in 2016. It took us 18 years to develop. 18 years. It has been going now for nearly 10 years and is functioning as an exemplary, mutually supportive mini neighborhood, a model for what the Americans have termed the old-fashioned community of the future. And it is still unique in the UK. There are about, 24 co-housing communities generally in the UK, mostly intergenerational and family-based. And there are a number of groups coming up. There's a group called Still Green, which has been around for years, which is working now with a small development firm called Town. And if you want to look at Town's website, you'll get an idea of what progress there is. Housing 21, a big housing association in Birmingham, is pioneering the development of co-housing, in inverted commas, for ethnic elders in deprived areas of the city, which is a great thing to do. But personally, I'm not sure that the kind of autonomy practiced by New Ground is being fostered. And to me, the essence of co-housing is the control of one's environment by the people who live in it. And the process towards building that is called co-production, a genuine partnership with a developer, between the developer and a potential resident group that is based on equal voices. So New Ground, still unique, as I said, is self-governing, self-managing, and it operates through a series of work groups who report to the community as a whole in their monthly meeting. In terms of care, they very strongly keep to the adage that we look out for each other, not after each other. They have a system of health buddies who are part of the fabric. Everyone has at least 2 health buddies who keep an eye out for them and assist when there is a health crisis. The whole concept of New Ground has been based on a very conscious process of community building among older people around a set of agreed core values. We had 18 years to do it, but not many of the people who took part in that 18 years actually survived to take a flat in New Ground. But the work that we did before moving into New Ground was an absolutely solid foundation for the neighborliness and kindness and buddying that is prevalent there now. And to my mind, the challenge is to sustain that ethos beyond the founders into the future. And that's an experience of every older co-housing group. How do you get the settlers to keep up the ethos and spirit of the pioneers. Now, New Ground was a model that was based on a model that I researched in the Netherlands in the late 90s. And there have been decades of government encouragement for group living in the Netherlands. And there's some 200 or 300 what they call living groups of older people in the Netherlands, or clustered housing is the model that they're discussing now. Now, I don't want to idealize the Netherlands. It's a long time since I was there. I have gone into their policies quite intensively just in the last 6 months, and produced a report for the Older People's Housing Task Force. And you can see that on the end of these slides, a reference to it that you can read online in the Housing Learning Improvement Network's website. So I've done a desk study of what's happening in the Netherlands now. The same kind of push factors as in the UK and as in Ireland. Policy is based on the fact that in 1980, only 37% of Dutch older people lived independently, and now it's 89%. There was, after the Second World War, quite a heavy reliance on old age homes as a model for older people, and that's what present government is trying to get away from because it's too expensive. Almost 3/4 of the over 90s in the Netherlands live alone. Policy has reflected the fact that health and social care expenditure against a general housing shortage are producing strains in the economy and will continue to do so. Under occupation of family housing by single older people is a problem in Holland, in the UK, and I'm sure in Ireland. Add to that the fact that older people are reluctant to move, even if they're living in the most unsuitable housing. I mean, in the UK, only 12% of older people live in housing that is step-free, and less than half of older people have a bathroom on the ground floor. So there is a huge problem around the type of housing that older people are reluctant to move from. It's over large for them, and families need housing, and it's also not accessible in the way that they want. So Dutch policy has reflected the fact that older people need a more attractive offer if they're going to ever move. Various research studies have shown that the numbers of older people in relation to shrinking family size and shrinking availability of care workers means that there is a growing care deficit in relation to the needs of older people. So what's grown up in the Netherlands, and I wish it had grown up more in the UK, is a political mindset that favors investment in prevention. In other words, don't let older people get so lonely and isolated that they develop health problems and they occupy hospital beds or old age care home places. So invest now to save money later. The Dutch have a saying in some of their policy documents: an ounce of well-being saves a kilogram of care. So put your money into well-being rather than care. I think too, what I picked up from my research in the Netherlands and since has been the fact that there's more awareness there of the impact of social change on aging. That we're talking about a generation more used to exercising control over their own lives than previously. And they're not keen on institutional forms of care or paternalistic ageism. Now, that certainly was the impulse behind the development of the New Ground Group. They wanted to keep control over their own lives. They did not want to sit in some day centre singing Daisy, Daisy, or pack up your troubles in your old kit bag, and inflict on themselves the sorts of social care attitudes that infantilize them. So Dutch policy, as it is currently being expressed, is that old age is more than just living. And I'll read you a little bit of a policy document from the Dutch, which is: the current 50 plus generation is independent, enterprising, and are used to taking charge of life themselves. When it comes to housing, people often have strong ideas about their housing future. Nobody wants to end up in a care institution where there is hardly any room for their own interpretation of lifestyle or care. A dream is to realize a housing project together with others, completely in line with the personal way of life. A place where you, as good neighbors, are there for each other and where you can choose to share space. Now that sums up New Ground. When I was doing research in the Netherlands in the late 90s, so many Dutch older people said to me, A, I don't want to be told what to do in my old age, and B, I don't want to lie behind my door for weeks before someone notices my absence. So what they wanted was autonomy and, I guess, neighborly surveillance. And they it's very strong that those two motives are very strong behind developing co-housing for older people in the Netherlands. So recent conservative governments in Holland are probably more focused on closing down expensive forms of care than when I was there in the 90s. But they have revisited policies and actively encouraged the 55 plus population to think ahead and plan for their old age. Policy statements like, are you 55 and older? And have you ever thought about with whom and where you want to grow old? For example, with friends and like-minded people in a renovated farm or a residential courtyard. By taking the initiative yourself, you have more freedom to choose how, with whom you live and when you move. Now, policy initiatives from central government through down to local authorities have made more of a priority of group living for older people, to make home sharing easier, to remove the obstacles to moving house, and to ensure a transition from a very heavily oriented system towards residential care to one with caring neighborly communities. And they have made, to help this happen, incentivizing subsidies and loans available. And local authorities sometimes make sites available below the market price. There is, and has been for some time, a system of encouraged self-build called collective private commissioning. In Dutch, it's known as a CPO system. And that means that subsidy is available to a group of people or to a small developer who want to introduce group living for a particular group of people. The ideal is one of vital residential communities where residents know each other, feel connected to each other, actively participate in activities, organize activities themselves, and manage and use the common areas themselves. Now, in my country, there's a real sort of apathy that is generated by some forms of institutional approach to old age, like sheltered housing, old age care, etc. There isn't sufficient attention to working with a group of people to make a project their own, and in the process get to know each other and decide how they want to live together and to share responsibility and control and management between themselves. One of the mottos of the New Ground Group is "We shall not be done unto." So, in the Netherlands, housing associations are encouraged to work with groups of older people that they're providing for, to help them get to know each other and to share in responsibility. In my own country, I think housing associations have become over huge, over commercialized, and their ethos is very, very uh, sort of antithetical to co-production or involving their clients. The system of CPOs and subsidies for home sharing and for group development in the Netherlands has sparked the rise of a support infrastructure, which is very helpful for groups, a burgeoning number of small agencies which can assist older people to develop their own communities, and the role of something called in Dutch, the procesbegeleider, or process consultant, supervisor, has emerged as in person or in small organizations who can help groups both develop a sense of community and develop their own buildings to live in. So the interest and the subsidies which government has put in place have sparked the support that older people need to take advantage of the subsidies. And I think that's a real lesson. So what else do we learn from all this? And I'll finish with this. That for in old age, a friendly, supportive neighborhood is vital, and it can be developed. In the Netherlands, there are additional subsidies where there are a lot of old people in a particular locality, subsidies for developing some kind of common room where they can meet, so that they're not so isolated and they have some kind of local focus to meet each other in. So that's one lesson. You can develop a supportive neighborhood if you put some effort into it. Public policy makers, state politicians, etc., need to think ahead and invest in prevention. Older people need incentives. They need encouraging themselves to think about their old age and to plan ahead together. And there needs to be positive policies that promote the co-housing model, in my view, to encourage older people to think that's possible for me. And it needs to involve all levels of government. So local authorities are particularly important in the whole process. So, I mean, I will finish there. You can see on the screen lovely picture of New Ground. The whole group participated in the design of that building, and that was such an important factor in creating and consolidating the community spirit that they had developed over the years. It is a lovely, lovely building and a lovely setting, as you can see. So, Rosalind, I will finish there.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Maria. I was picking out my apartment there, the one with the nice big balcony. Thanks so much for that. I was actually jotting down some of the things, I think points you're making. Just some of the things you said. I think, you spoke about co-housing being the control of the environment we live in. I thought that was very, again, just making that point. And again, in terms of the older people, that they look out for each other, not after each other. Again, struck a chord, or that I liked this figure you gave, that 1 ounce of well-being saves 1 kilogram of care. A really good one. And the idea, I suppose, that investment is prevention. So that is something, from kind of the work that has been going on in Ireland. There is, I suppose, there is awareness of this. So it is nice to hear that there are these options. I did have the luck earlier last year to actually visit 3 co-housing communities in Delft in Holland, and so a lot of what you're talking about here. 2 were private, they were small groups, but again, that whole kind of creating something for themselves was very. I got to meet people living there. Was very kind of in evidence. And then one was a very large social housing co-housing cooperative that had been set up in the 80s. Again, with that kind of support for each other in evidence too. So really interesting to hear what's going on, and especially to see what you did create, even though it took 18 years in North London. Hopefully, we're going to hear from Anne now, who is going to tell us how she's going to do it a lot quicker, hopefully. So Anne Connolly is the co-founder of Co-Housing Communities Ireland, recently established not-for-profit social enterprise, which was set up by herself and co-founder and architect Anna Dolan. And it was set up to promote and support the development of co-housing communities for people over 50 in Ireland. Anne has worked for more than 20 years in the area of smart ageing. She was CEO of Isaacs. I knew her from Age Friendly days. Her day job is CEO of Savvy Health now, which provides clients with a holistic, preventative and proactive healthy ageing programme. So I'll hand over to Anne to tell us what she's been up to. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you very much, Rosalind, for the opportunity to talk today about what I think is a really important topic for us, which is co-housing. And I'll come to why I think it's important in a minute. But I also want to thank you for the opportunity of getting to know Maria. For many years now, I've very much admired what Maria has been able to do with New Ground. I've loved everything I heard about the community, and her presentation today did more than so many words can do in terms of selling the attractiveness of co-housing as an option for people who are over 50. And like you, Rosalind, I picked out some wonderful phrases, which I'm afraid, Maria, I'm going to plagiarize, but I will credit in time. So if we look at co-housing communities for people over 50, and we talk quite often about 55 for planning reasons. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so I wanted to start by emphasizing that it's not a new idea, but it is new to Ireland. And I think it's an important new idea in Ireland because at the moment we've about 70,000 people turning 50 every year. And we know that, and this is the last of the statistics, I promise you, over 88% of people over 65 are living in under-occupied homes at a time when we have a very significant housing crisis. So co-housing communities for people over 50, it's not for everybody, as we will explore, but it can be a very attractive solution for a lot of people in this market, releasing larger family homes onto the market and providing people with an opportunity to live in really well-designed, attractive communities that are future-proofed. So let me just give you a little bit of history as I've understood it. The idea goes back to the 60s in Denmark when the concept was originally developed, and it has grown exponentially since. They estimate about 500 communities, just like we've seen with New Ground, exist in Denmark, and of those, over half of them are for people over 50. It then grew into the US. There was a particular architect, Chuck Jurett, who practiced in Denmark, brought the idea back to America, where it is flourishing. since the 90s. They estimate there's about 160 developments in the US, with about 125 more in development. Canada, less well developed, but 17 established communities, 42 in development. And as Maria was saying, in the UK, they reckon about 14 full developments and another quite a number in development as we speak. So I never heard of co-housing communities till I went to Quebec over a decade ago as part, as Rosalind said, the WHO's Age-Friendly Cities programme, which we had fostered here in Ireland. As part of a visit there, was brought to see a co-housing community, and it immediately resonated with me as something for me. It's more than anything else. It said to me, it's a very attractive way of living. So there was 32 units across 2 apartment blocks. The whole group came together to meet me and very generously answered questions. And what it had was common to a lot of the features of other developments I've seen since. So I'll briefly summarize, because Maria has also given some insights in what co-housing communities have in common. But typically, people have very high quality, well-designed, energy efficient homes. So there's no sense of having to move into a lesser space, as it were. But in addition to the privacy of your own hall door, you have shared amenities, which are very attractive and deliberately designed to foster interaction between people who are living there. They typically include a common or clubhouse large enough for everybody to cook together, eat together. Some communities that'll be once a week, others it's once a month. But the multi-purpose rooms can be used for yoga, Pilates, history, drawing, whatever interests the group have. They also have very attractive outdoor facilities, and they're again designed to foster interaction, people coming together in the evenings. Canadian summers are a lot more reliable than ours. And it was brought home to me by one of the women, and I was asking, what was your motive for moving in? When did you move? What was the context? And she said to me, it's funny, she said, you know that house over the wall? And she pointed to it. I used to live there. And in the summer evenings, I'd be listening to this group of people outside around a barbecue, having great food, drinking beer and wine, and having the crack. They were just having so much fun. I eventually asked myself, what am I doing here instead of in there? And she moved and has never regretted it. That was the sort of resonating piece for me. So when I went on, I initially thought I'd set up a consultancy practice in smart aging. And I went off to get trained with Chuck Jarrett in the US, an online course in how to be a facilitator for developing co-housing communities, how to support the group go from concept stage through to turnkey, as it were, and address all the issues that they need to decide on along the way. So I did that course. As a result of it, I'm part of a group of people who are in the process of setting up a co-housing community in the US, and I got to know a fantastic woman in Oak Creek community, Stillwater. They're very keen to do house swaps when we get going. I then went last summer to see Klokkeskoven in Denmark, about 35 units, very Danish, so a lot of differences, but some things in common. And there before Christmas, Anna, and so I should say Anna, my co-founder, is an architect, and Kevin McCormack, who is our expert advisor on housing development. We went over to Cannockmill and had a great day with the community there, getting under the hood, as it were, under the bonnet, to see how they got from where they were to where they are now, which is a flourishing community. They were 12 years in the making, not like Maria's 18. And that length of time has informed the design of what we aim to do in co-housing communities Ireland to significantly reduce those delays and address some of the challenges that people face. So let's look then at what we did. I reached out to find out other people who could be interested in making it happen in Ireland. I've known Anna for years, a good friend, and she had the same idea of a way of living in once we hit our 50s or 60s. I'd known Kevin for quite a number of years, so we came together we've set up a not-for-profit company. We designed a website. We went to talk to the banks about financing, to Dublin City Council, but very importantly for us, to the housing agency, because we believe that while co-housing isn't for everybody, it could be a really important piece of a jigsaw to address the issue of people over 50 needing housing that, if well designed, can significantly extend the period of independent living whilst releasing larger family homes onto the market that are badly needed. So we brought together a group about a year ago of potentially interested buyers. We learned a lot from that meeting, including the fact that it takes time to internalize this as an idea for yourself. But out of that group, we still have about 20 who are potentially interested buyers. We then launched, we eventually put our head above the parapet last week. Anna did some great interviews with the Kitty Holland and the Irish Times. The Journal did an op-ed piece from the two of us. She went on television. The result has been really interesting. We were not expecting it. So since then, we've had over 100 people come to us asking to be put on a list of potentially interested buyers. Most in Ireland, but some Canadian border with Trump America looking for anticipating the need to leave, some from Denmark. So it's very interesting, but it's made us quite confident that we're tapping into something that is of its time. So let's go to the next slide if I can. I'm not going to dwell in depth because Maria has done such a good job of describing and showing us pictures of what co-housing can be at its best. But our website suggests that we describe it really as a way of living in a community, like-minded people who want to remain in their neighborhood, want to follow a sustainable lifestyle. And it's the gap in the market for people who want to move out of large housing units, don't want to move into the anonymity of an apartment block, nowhere near ready for supported housing. And they want to live in a community where they can, depending on where they're at on any particular day, have the privacy of closing their own hall door or the option of going out and being sociable with other like-minded souls. So hence the emphasis on our website on moving in, a new beginning, the privacy of your own balcony, but the communal healthy activities. So typically these communities will have cycling clubs and they'll have art clubs and book reading and film review clubs. So that's the first of them. And if we can go to the second slide, where just extending the definition and maybe through the pictures, trying to get across that the collaborative nature that Maria spoke about of how a group come together and within the constraints of planning, design the features and benefits they want from their own community. They're often described as intentional living arrangements. They're deliberately designed to maximize social interaction and to foster mutual support, looking out for each other, a sense of belonging, and to get a balance right between the privacy of your own hall door and the social opportunities that there are. Lots of couples, you'll find one highly sociable, the other happy at home behind that hall door. So we have to cater for different needs. So if we go on then to look at what we consider to try to summarize, what are the 6 distinguishing characteristics of co-housing that, for example, would differentiate it from supported housing or moving into a retirement village or into a large apartment block. So the first is that collaborative issue that we talked about, and Maria has really well exemplified. So the group together come together and decide roughly how many units they would like to have. They're very constrained by planning law. So in Dublin and large urban areas, it's going to be apartment living. There's going to be further constraints by virtue of what sites are available. But within those constraints, they can decide so much of how many one bedroom, two bedrooms, what sort of shared facilities, etc. Secondly, they weave in, and we'll come to this concept of a community charter in a minute, but deliberately from the beginning, as a group, articulating what they mean by good neighbours. And some communities, there'll be more emphasis on that than on others. And I am emphasizing the flexibility. There is no one size fits all. The community that comes together, that group of founders, will determine an awful lot of the features and benefits for their community. The emphasis is also on high quality, A-rated or very energy efficient, future-proof homes with the best of designs. A lot of people are moving in from very old homes, not energy efficient, kitchen is all over the place, old-fashioned bathrooms. This is an opportunity to go into very, very high-end designed homes. Typically, and I want to emphasize this, so in our model, some models are designed as co-ops, and that's a very different model. In ours, the model is every home is individually owned, which is not to exclude at all the concept of some communities will want to do a portion of social and affordable homes. In fact, most, and this is what we found interesting from the consultation, but there is no common ownership of all the homes, because this becomes an issue for families who want to know that at the end of the day, if the person wants to move on or move into care or dies, people really need to know what happens at that stage. So it's best to have that issue on the table from the beginning. And the approach we've been taking is that when it comes time to sell, you sell to people on a waiting list, and typically there are long waiting lists. And people on a waiting list have met the community, know what it means to commit to living in a community. So the family are assured that the value of the home can be realized in the estate. Now, I can answer more questions on that later. Self-managed, typically each unit has one person on a committee that makes all the key decisions, and typically they set up a lot of subcommittees, whether it's to do with maintenance or landscaping or social activities or lots of things. One of the features of co-housing is quite often the annual management fees are significantly lower than you will get on the market, typically because the group themselves will do a lot, but not all of the work. So yes, they'll bring in plumbers and electricians, but they'll do a lot of the landscaping, they'll do a lot of the repairs, they'll do a lot of the painting, etc. And the shared spaces is really what often sets them apart. The group themselves will decide what they want. So some may want an inside gym or an outside gym. They'll typically want barbecues or fire pits. They'll want good outside seating and tables and chairs. They want bike sheds, limited car parking space or shared cars. So that's up to the group to decide. So if we look then at the evidence around what are the benefits, what do we know to be the benefits of living in a co-housing community? And it's interesting, Hope Co-housing have a very good report, which I've referenced there, if you want to read it. But we divide the benefits into two. One is at the individual level and then the wider societal level. So at the individual level, typically, but not always, the person coming into the community is a mortgage-free homeowner, and they're aiming to release capital either to improve their pension pot or to share some of the surplus with family members, enabling them get on the housing ladder. But it's about releasing capital. It's about addressing the need as we grow older, particularly as a lot of people will be still working, but some won't. And as we leave a work environment, the who's your tribe piece becomes very important. So you're living in a community and you know you can look to others for support because you're willing to give it yourself. We've talked about the quality of the homes and the independent living, and the evidence we have that living in co-housing is good for your health and extends the period in which you can live independently before needing care because of the way the group looks out for each other. At a societal level, obviously, Ireland badly needs larger homes, and this is one attractive way of doing it. Typically, there's a community benefit because people moving into these communities like volunteering and like volunteering locally. So there's some studies which look at what those impacts have been locally on community development and cohesion. There's an economic benefit because when you introduce a group of people over 50 who typically have more disposable income than lots of other cohorts, there can be an element of economic regeneration, particularly in more rural areas. And lastly, it's a very sustainable green way of living. So that's the good news, but let's look at the barriers. What's stopping this happen? And there are a few. And as I say, it's not for everybody. But the two main barriers that we know are, one is sites. Finding a suitable site in a desirable location to live is not easy. Yes, there are large unused land banks. It's tapping into those, whether they're owned by local authorities, by religious institutions, by developers holding on to them. It's finding those sites that are suitably sized and suitably located is not easy. The second one is bridging finance. As I mentioned before, typically the people coming to live in a co-housing community have a home of their own, wholly owned, mortgage-free. But they do, and we know this from the groups we've talked to, they do not want to sell that house until the new home is ready to move into. They don't want the uncertainty of the house pricing going up or down, and they don't want the trauma of having to move a home into a rented home before waiting for the final house to be built. At the moment, the banks are cautious. There are central bank guidelines on macro-prudential rules, as it were, that get in the way of bridging finance. But we believe it's an attractive proposition for financial institutions to be able to offer short-term bridging finance as reasonable loans to a very secured buyer. But nevertheless, it's one of the issues we know we have to tackle into the future. So let's look at making it happen.
Anne, apologies,
yes,
just to say. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, very quickly. So anybody, apologies for having gone over. So if you go to the next slide, I mentioned the team of us. So Anna is an architect and Kevin is an expert in development management. So for potential buyers, if you're interested, register with us. Try and canvass support so there's a large enough group in your own area, and go and try and find suitable sites. For what we can do for you, when we see from our database there's enough people in an area, we can bring people together, we can facilitate them through the process of agreeing the design of what they want, finding sites, supporting them get planning permission, in taking on the developers and getting it through to final build. One of the things we do in this way is we de-risk it for developers by having an advanced group of buyers committed to buying. And I think it's one of the ways in which we believe we can shorten that time frame from 18 years or 12 years down to what will typically be about 3 to 4. So apologies for having gone over time and look forward to answering any questions.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Anne. We now have time for questions and answers. So there's quite a few have gone into the Q&A box. So I think what we'll do is kind of work our way through them. I know, Maria, you've answered a couple and I put those answers out, but so I might just we might just move very quickly through them. So the first one I think was put in when you were speaking, Maria, and it was around, I suppose, people looking at rent. So I suppose looking, if we were just to concentrate on the North London
I wouldn't be
housing,
able.
there isn't rent. They all own their own homes
Oh,
there.
no, they're mixed tenure. About a third of them are social rent.
Right. Okay.
I wouldn't be able to. I
You
don't
wouldn't
think
be
it's
able to say
useful
that.
anyway.
Yeah.
Average rents between countries are not very
Yeah.
illuminating. But
No.
the mixed tenure nature of the group is important, and
Okay.
you wouldn't know who rents or who owns.
Perfect. Thanks, Maria. Moving to the next question, and I suppose what supports are offered to help support the older person live independently in these homes? Now, you did talk about how looking out rather than looking after. Are there any additional supports, or would it be your normal kind of
Would be your normal. I mean,
normal supports that you organise yourself?
the
Is it, or-
supports of nosy, caring neighbours are
Yes.
essential. Who
Okay.
notices that your door doesn't open, your windows, your window blinds don't go up? But they're in other terms, the usual social
As
service.
usual. Yeah. Okay. What advice or pointers, again to Maria, based on your experience, could shorten the setup period for a new co-housing group? 18 years is a long time.
Yes, I wish we had the sense to recruit particular skills into the group. I mean, we took anyone who was wanting and was interested, and most of those women were from the soft end of jobs, social workers, educators, or whatever. What we could have done with because the Cannock Mill, for instance, had an architect. The Lancaster group had a guy who was experienced in project management. I wish we had known that and recruited those skills to our early group so that we could stand on our own feet more, because we had to go to a housing association and you kind of pay a price for that in autonomy. Because however well-meaning that housing association is, they don't change their culture for you. So what Anne brought up, and that was really interesting talk, I shall listen to it again. The idea of bridging funding. In the UK, there's something like 2.6 trillion of unmortgaged equity among older people over 50. And it seems to me that what they need is a system which government comes in, various levels of government, helping to de-risk that venture by saying, as the Dutch do, by saying, here's a loan against your development, so that you can feel free to sell your houses when it is really necessary. But here's a development loan which you can pay back once you've sold them. I mean, that in a sense was what the Housing Association did for us. They front forwarded all the funding, but they've never done another co-housing project. I don't know why. And lots fail. And yet all that unmortgaged equity that could just be tapped. It's crazy.
Okay. Thanks for that, Maria. Are there corporate entities, this is from David Rouse in the Housing Agency, such as residential management companies, supporting the ownership and management of these communities? If yes, who serves as directors of the entities and how are they supported legally and financially? So I think that's around, I suppose, for a co-housing community or cooperative housing, my understanding would be it would be the people living there coming together and are the directors in their own.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
So,
I mean, in Holland, there are housing associations that perform that function for co-housing groups.
yes.
I guess.
Okay.
There aren't any that I know of in the UK, and I don't know about Ireland. Probably not.
And I think to your point, Maria, it's an important principle that the ownership lies with the founding group.
Yeah.
And they may buy in as they feel they need professional supports and services, but it's at their own behest.
Yeah.
Yes. I think if there's a way that that group can feel safe and control the capital going in, otherwise they're at the mercy of whoever is. I mean, as we were with the housing association, they were funding it and they called most of the shots.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's interesting because I'd seen so many case studies that I could see at a glance the big challenge was that delay, and 18 years is probably the outer limit, but 12 to 18 years is a long time. So that's why we were quite deliberate, Anna and I, in terms of recognizing the need for somebody with expertise in housing development who really was committed to the concept. So having Kevin on board as an advisor, not an owner, is really helpful. He knows the developers, he can approach the developers, he understands the process, he understands planning. So through all of that, we're hoping to fast track the process, but it's with advice as opposed to being owned by an external entity.
And what it also needs is constant efforts to change the attitudes and inform the attitudes of local authorities, of planners, of those decision makers. They are key to the process, and yet they can, I mean, in my country, local authorities are just sets of silos that don't even talk to each other. Let alone,
I probably have had a more positive experience because in when I set up the Age Friendly Ireland, we set up the World Health Organization's Age Friendly Cities and Counties programs. Every local authority in Ireland became a member of this network, all chaired by the CEO at the beginning and all committed to developing an age-friendly strategy for the county. Now, admittedly, the focus is on a group that tend to be older, but I'm optimistic.
The work continues.
Support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the work is very much continues and supported.
Great.
It's the only country in the world in which every local authority is a member of this community. So my sense is that they understand housing needs, they understand the opportunity of intervening much earlier so that you can extend the period of independent living before people have to move in to some of the great facilities that exist around supported housing.
So I suppose I'm just going to come in here, Anne, because it kind of leads this conversation to the next question, which is what kind of help does the Irish government or the local councils currently provide for setting up cooperatives or co-housing? And I suppose I'll just come in here and I'll say to the person who's asking that question, I suppose one of the things about this series of webinars is there is a kind of an understanding, I suppose, to go back to the first one and listen to what Tom O'Donnell was talking about, what's been set up, to go to the second one on affordable housing and listen to the Community Land Trust in Cork, and again, how they're working with Cork Local Authority. But in terms of your kind of an answer to that, and it is to you, Anne, really, what help would you see at the moment from local councils for setting up?
Well, if I can divide it into two and start by saying we're not looking for funding, okay? We believe this is a self-financing model. What we are looking for is support around addressing some of those barriers. So at government level, they could be helpful in persuaders for the financial institutions to be able to support providing bridging finance. The second bit is the sites. There are large land banks owned by a mixture of owners, some of them local authorities, some of them religious institutions. I think a lot more could be done to positively identify areas that are designated as suitable for housing for people over 55, in brackets, not necessarily supported or assisted housing. So I think that's probably Well, the other way they can be very helpful, and the good local authorities can be really great at this, is helping to convene, get the message out, communicate out that this is an option for people in their 50s and above. Convene public meetings. We'll happily go talk, and I think they can be very useful as enablers.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Anne. Maria, in terms of the process for getting the housing subsidy, what was the process like for getting the housing subsidy in the UK?
Well, in regard to New Ground, hopeless.
Okay.
We thought we would get a housing grant for the mixed tenure, which was very important to the group and was one of the reasons why it took us 18 years. I mean, we had to have a housing association partner, and we went through about 8 before we found the one that helped us develop the scheme.
So could I ask a question there, Maria? If you having that experience of going through 8 housing associations before you found the right one, again, if you had advice for groups who are trying to set up and potentially what worked in the end with the 8th one?
What worked in the end was an enlightened chief executive of one said, "Okay, I'll help you." It was serendipity, really, but. I don't know what the situation is in Ireland, but here housing associations have been forced over the years by government to merge, and they've got bigger and bigger and more commercial. And that doesn't breed a culture that is natural for working in partnership with local groups very easily. And I mean, I've done my best to try and kind of change that culture, but it's beyond me, really. We eventually provided a New Ground mixed tenure makeup via a charitable donation from a trust that wanted us to succeed. I mean, they gave us over $1 million to build the flats for those who needed to rent at a social rent. But, you know, I mean, that's difficult to replicate, really. You need, I mean, I would argue, well, for mixed tenure groups, because in the UK, co-housing is seen as a very sort of middle class enclave and is criticised for that. And yet it is only middle class and ownership based because of the absence of state support and housing grants.
Yeah. Okay. Maria, the next question I'm going to ask, will co-housing supported by, I think that's too early, be subjected to stage 8 planning process? That is kind of, I suppose the local authorities aren't building them yet. Or do any of the co-housing models consider low income older people or non-home owners who are older people interested in co-housing? So again, I think you've answered that question, Maria, already. And this is for you. It's not what will the typical cost of living in one of these units be? Just to get an idea for the Irish context. Thank you.
And as you know, that how long is a piece of string? It's impossible to answer. But like what we've done is a mock-up of, we're looking at a couple of sites, for example, in the Dublin 6-8 area, where we've taken a site and said, okay, we could fit 32 units into that 35. And done some rough estimates, assuming the price for the site and planning and everything. So they're typically going to come in, we think, ideally lower than the sort of 500k. Because we take out the developer's 20% margin, and we're a not-for-profit, so we will be able to come in below what you would pay on the market. But you're paying, as you buy, you're paying for the shared facility area. So it does mean you're paying above market price for the package that you get. And it will range probably from, in rural areas or smaller urban areas, it's going to be much less. But you could imagine paying from 400 to 700, 750, depending, for a larger 2-bedroom.
And what would be argued in a place like Denmark or Holland would be that as an individual, you sacrifice a percentage of the space that you would normally want in your unit because you've got communal facilities.
Yes.
I think that's quite an excellent, and that helps fund them. I've always discouraged that over here in the UK because there's a very distressing tendency among developers to build for older people rabbit hutches.
That's right. That's right.
Well, that brings us to the next question here. Would the co-living or niche living model, which is designed for digital nomads, work for elderly living? We have a local example in Dún Laoghaire. I love the approach in Groningen, the Netherlands, which is an all-city silver economy approach. So
I'll take that one if I can.
Yeah.
Marie, I'm sure you've used language is desperately important, and the word elderly does not describe co-housing communities for people over 50, 50, 60s, 70s, typically very active, often still working, very engaged. They will not want to move into a rabbit hutch, as Maria says. Space matters. So well-designed space matters. I know I want to move into a 2-bedroom plus study area. Others are happy with 1 bedroom because typically the shared amenities include guest accommodation, which is a rental income, but it allows for family to stay. And as Maria says, some of the communities will decide to create shared laundry facilities, reducing the space you need inside. A lot of them will have repair workshops, storage areas for luggage and things like that. So there's creative ways in which you can save space without living in cramped conditions.
Maria, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so.
No? Okay. This is just I suppose to you, Anne, anyone in the Sutton, I think they'll have to get in touch with you, anyone in the Sutton Hothe area interested in setting up a group. So I'll leave that there. Is there a problem with people having dogs they bring with them?
Very good question. Very good. And it's interesting. It can be a very interesting one. And the answer is simple. The group comes together and the group sets down their rules. And I know of communities where dogs are not allowed, and I know of communities where they are.
Yeah.
That founding group decide.
Yeah.
And Newground has cats and it had a dog for a long time, was the only male on the premises. And everybody loved him, but he died sadly a few years ago, and nobody else has a dog. But cats abound.
Yeah.
Next question I have here, and I think actually I'm looking at the time and it's nearly 1:10. So I am actually going to have to kind of take one last question. Well, I'll just say this. Thank you for superb, inspiring and practical presentations, Maria and Anne. More of these, please, Housing Agency. Yeah, there's actually, there's a huge interest in this. What I would say to people listening is some of the questions around the practicalities and what comes next, I would say some of that will come into the next discussion that we have on the 26th of March. So for those, there are a lot of people who we haven't been able to answer, but keep listening. And, I think it is an area that there is a lot of interest in. So that conversation hasn't ended. So we will have the next webinar. I want to thank both our speakers today. I'm going to end it here, but I'll actually, before I end it, Maria and Anne, is there any final thing you'd like to say to the people who've still stayed on over their lunch?
I would. I'd just like to say that the size of the group matters. It needs to be big enough to have enough zest in it and to afford a lift. It needs not to be so big you can't make decisions.
So how many then?
Well, I'd say about 30 at max, really.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what was the other point I wanted? Oh yes, age structure. Yeah. If you're all in your 50s, you're all going to be going into your 80s together. We had a 36-year age range. We still have, between someone who's about 59 and our oldest at 95. But even so, there's a clump of people who were all the similar age when they came in, and they all now moved into their 80s and are getting frailer and frailer. And I don't know quite how you crack it,
Yeah.
because you can't really say to people who've worked very hard over the years for something, no, you can't come in because you're the wrong age.
Yeah.
But that age structure matters.
As well as the skill set that they're bringing as well,
Yeah.
as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And Anne, have you something you
No, I
would
think
like
Maria
to
summed up. I
finish?
think
Yeah.
she's dead right. A lot of thought into optimum size. We suggest probably about 35 units. It's got to be big enough to share the cost of the shared facilities and provide diversity of interests, and small enough to be a really meaningful community. So I suspect there's a load of very practical questions out there. If anybody wants to fire them on to us, if they're interested for themselves in co-housing, they can get onto our website, hello@cohousingireland.ie. We're happy to answer any of those sort of practical questions.
Great. Thanks very much, Anne. Okay, so just to finish, do join us on the 26th of March at 11:30. We'll hear, I think, some of the questions that were coming in today. We'll hear from Elke Sepp about how Hamburg is supporting cooperative housing. And I suppose you mentioned, I think, Maria, you mentioned the Dutch person who almost has the role of supporting the group. So it'd be nice to see how Hamburg are doing that. And then we'll have the panel of speakers, which will include Hugh Brennan, Aideen Clarig, Hayley Kern, and Jim Bainham. And David Silk from the Housing Agency will be chairing. So I'd like to thank Maria and Anne today for your time, for your expertise, for your knowledge, and to learn a bit more about Holland as well as the UK and what's happening in Ireland is great. And those slides will be available on our website and be sent out to people who've registered, I think. So you'll be able to get the links that both Maria and Anne had on their slides. I'd like to thank the team here in the agency for all the work they have done in putting this together, in particular Johanna and Sophie today. So thank you very much, and see you on the 26th.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.